Okay, welcome everybody to lesson 7 for Education for Nepal English group. This is our YouTube channel for past lesson recordings. And today we'll be teaching history, biology, and music. And our first topic is going to be history.
All right, so we'll be doing Great Depression today. So it began in 1929. It lasted the longest in US and Europe, while it was more mild in Japan and Latin America. It was just a time of severe unemployment. The price level went down, and people were just not producing anything or not as much. So industrial output in the US nearly halved and its GDP was reduced by 30%. This was partly due to the stock market crash, where US stock prices declined by 33%, reducing spending. And then the banking panic, where people lost trust in the banks. So they all tried to take out money at the same time, which caused widespread bank failures. This reduced funding for financial investments for businesses, further decreasing spending. So in the two graphs to the right, the top one shows, well, the bottom one shows unemployment over time, and there's a massive spike in the 1930s, the early 1930s. Um, and then the one on top shows the price level, which went down during the 1930s because obviously depression, prices go down. So the presidency at the beginning was the Hoover administration. So Herbert Hoover was the president, believed that it was not the government's responsibility to create jobs or provide relief, which is a classical economist. And even when calls grew for intervention, Hoover didn't do anything because he thought they were steps towards socialism, which he did not like. Hoover's proposed when he did try to propose programs, they were all shot down because people thought it was wasteful. And then when steps were finally taken, they were too little, too late. So in the 1933 election, FDR beat him by a landslide. Okay, so there was a few attempts at recovery. The biggest one was the New Deal by FDR. It formed a bunch of programs designed to reduce unemployment and revitalize the economy. One of such programs was the NRA, or National Recovery Administration. It set standards in industry such as minimum wage and child labor laws and a lot more. And then the FDIC was made due to the bank runs. So in order to prevent people from losing their money, the government will now insure bank deposits up to a certain amount. And then there's also the AAA, which was designed to help out farmers by raising prices and giving them cash subsidies. There are a bunch more, but so there's the second part of the New Deal, or what people like to refer to it as programs made here fell into three categories. The first one was relief, which is basically helping out the poor and unemployed. The second one is recovery, which is designed to bring the economy back to what it was before the Great Depression by creating jobs and spending federal money. And then the third one is reform, which is basically to implement new programs and regulations in order to prevent a future depression. And in general, the consensus is that the New Deal did not have that big of an impact in bringing the U.S. economy out of the depression. So So in conclusion, the federal government became more involved with the economy after this. It sprouted a new type of economic thinking. It's called Keynesian economics. But the Great Depression ended mainly due to World War II when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So all the US factories were sent into full production of war goods like planes. Conscription, which is basically getting drafted for war, reduced the unemployment. And then some long-term effects are it ended the gold standard where you could exchange currency for gold. There's like a equal conversion between them. And then there's also a massive change in economic policy. So yeah, that's it for history. The next section is biology.
Okay, so wait, we have a question.
Hello.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, hello.
Yeah, there is no question from history.
Yeah, there's no questions.
Okay.
Okay, so now moving on to biology, we're first going to talk about cells. And cells are basically the basic units of structure and function in living organisms, and they're often called the building blocks of life. And there are many different types of cells which specialize with specialized structures and functions, and these include nerve cells, muscle cells, and blood cells. And also cells have different parts such as the cell membrane, cytoplasm, genetic material called DNA. And the DNA provides instructions for the cell to grow and carry out its functions. And also the cell, like obviously it has to grow and divide just like every other living organism to survive. And they do this in a process called mitosis and meiosis. And finally, cells also use structures called organelles to perform functions. And to give some examples of organelles, they include the nucleus, the mitochondria, endoplasm reticulum, Golgi apparatus, etc. We're going to go into detail about that in the later slides. And now moving on, first we're going to talk about plant cells and then animal cells, which are like the two main types of cells. So plant cells have a rigid cell wall, which is made out of cellulose, and the cellulose provides structure and support. Um, Not only that, plant cells, plant cells, they also have chloroplasts, which is why plants are generally green. And the chloroplasts in the plant cells also allow plant cells to capture sunlight energy through the process of photosynthesis. And moving on, plant cells also have a central vacuole which takes up most of the area of the plant cell, like 90%. And the vacuole is basically where everything is done, and it helps maintain and store nutrients and waste in the cell. And plant cells also have immunoplast, and these often like are the place where uh the plant cell stores things, and they store things such as energy and nutrients. And finally, plant cells also have plasmodesmata, and plasmodesmata are channels that connect the plant cells with like other cells, and they allow materials to be like transferred between the plant cells. So now moving on to animal cells, and Unlike plant cells, they have cell membranes that allow passage of material in and out of the cell. And these cell membranes regulate like what can enter and what can exit. And they don't want viruses and bacteria to enter, obviously. And animal cells also contain a nucleus where DNA is found and stored. And the nucleus directs and controls the activities of the cell based on like what the DNA says. And another key organelle is mitochondria. And this is like basically really the main workforce of the cell, which like converts nutrients into energy, and it helps like the other parts of the cell do the job. It gives the energy for that. And also many animal cells contain lysosomes and centrosomes. And lysosomes digest excess waste, while centrosomes help organize cell division and movement of components, which is very important. And finally, animal cells come in many shapes and sizes, and these include nerve cells, muscle cells, and skin cells. So animal cells are very common and also very useful. And each type of animal cell has a different structure, enabling it to carry out unique functions. And here's a picture contrasting the animal and plant cells.
Okay, so now we're moving on to music, and today we're going to talk about note values and time signature. So here's an overview of different types of notes. So in music, we use different types of notes to represent different lengths of playing the note. So at the top, you have the one that looks like a circle with an empty hole. That's called a whole note, and it's typically 4 beats long, which means you would hold the note for 4 beats, but it could also represent different lengths, and we'll talk about that later. And then the half note is the one below it, and that would be 2 beats, and the quarter note is 1 beat, so like half of the previous one. And the farther down you go, the shorter the note is. And after 16th note, you can keep adding more flags on the note to make it even shorter. And like each flag you add makes it half as long as the previous note. So the previous slide was all notes that you play, but for this slide, we will talk about rest, which means like the silence. So instead of playing, if you see a rest, that means you don't play. And each note corresponds to a rest. So the first one is the whole note, and the rest for that would look like the rectangle that's hanging from the fourth line, and that would mean you don't play anything for 4 beats. And the half notes rest would mean you don't play anything for 2 beats, and so on. Yes, so the next thing is time signature. So time signature is basically it tells you how many like it tells you how to count the beats in a song, and it goes at the beginning of the music score. So it's the thing that says 4/4, and you would just call it 4/4. So the top 4 means it indicates the number of beats in a measure. So that means every measure would have 4 beats. And the note on, I mean, the number on the bottom would indicate the value of the beat. So a 4 would mean a quarter note, so that indicates that the quarter note is 1 beat. And here are all of the common time signatures in music. So on the left column is, it might be confusing, but a crotchet is basically a quarter note, and a minim is a half note, and a quaver is an eighth note. So it's just another name for those notes. And then duple means 2 beats in a measure, triple means 3 beats in a measure, and quadruple means 4 beats in a measure. So for example, the first duple time and crotchet beat would mean there's 2 beats in a measure and each beat is a quarter note. So as you can see, like in the first row, all of the bottom numbers are 4 because all of them have the quarter note representing 1 beat. And in the second row, all the half notes represent 1 beat, and in the third row, eighth notes represent 1 beat. Can we go on? Okay. So the next thing is tempo, and tempo means how fast the music is played. So here are a list of common tempo markings in music. So the slowest one is called largo, and the numbers on the left mean the beats per minute. So how many beats you would hear in 1 minute. So 40 to 60 would be really, really slow. And then at the other end, like 160 plus would be called presto, and that's really, really fast. And actually all of these names are Italian words for speed. So you would just have to try to memorize them by like looking at music a lot. So here is like an example of music, and like sheet music that would put everything together. The red part is the tempo, and allegro is it was one of the tempos on the list, and it means like moderately fast. And BPM means beats per minute. So the blue part would mean how many beats there are in a minute. And the green is the bar line. So that just separates the music into measures. So every time you see a bar line, that means the measure ends. And the one in pink is time signatures. So that means there are 4 beats in this measure, and each beat is a quarter note. And the yellow part indicates the length of the measure. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you all for coming. And that's it for this lesson.